Hi, this is Mr. Seymour, and we are in Chapter 8 of your textbook, which discusses interest groups. I've skipped over Chapter 7. We're going to do that next week because I want to put interest groups next to lobbies. I believe that's where they really belong. Then in the next lesson, we're going to talk about the election process itself and look at, in the next unit, we're going to start looking at the nuts and bolts of American government in perspective to the branches and so forth. So moving along into interest groups, another name for interest groups is lobbies. And when we talk about lobbies or interest groups, particularly if we use the word lobby or lobbyist, most people think slime is probably a higher level than a lobbyist. They think money, they think graft, they think bribery almost. And I do have some videos that I'm posting up along with this particular lecture that I'm going to keep separate. I want you to look at those two sets of videos before you get into your online discussions because they're going to talk about the perception of lobbies, and we're going to look at from different perspectives the realities of lobbies, at least from the perspective of what people think lobbyists are all about and what lobbyists say they're all about. So let's go on ahead and get started with this lesson. All right, this is a picture from the Occupy movement. This is Occupy LA. And they're talking about the 99%. Now, the 99% is an argument that 1% of the population controls the majority of our wealth, and that 99% of the population have no political or financial interest or control in this country. We have to sit back and watch the 1% make the decisions for us. And of course, there are a lot of strategies involved in thinking, hey, why do we have this 99%? Some of it is, yes, disaffected or left out people, but in another problem is going to be voting participation, which we'll get into a little bit later. So in this case, you've got a grassroots movement, and a grassroots movement is a movement that comes from the bottom up, and they're trying to get attention. So these people would become an interest group. So let's get started with our introduction. The book talks about the role of special interest groups in the financial crisis in their introduction. And they say that there is some evidence that special interest groups and lobbying created the environment leading to the worst financial crisis in recent American history. That you would not have had the laws that allowed for the environment that caused the gouging on the poor, the subpar loans, the environment that led to the collapse of financial markets, and then the bailouts that followed. How could this happen? Who benefited the most from the efforts of the lobbies? And why did some firms appear to weather the financial storm in better shape than others did? This all becomes the question. Why were some businesses or banks considered too big to fail while others were allowed to fail? And then the question becomes, what should the role of special interests be in the political system, especially given negative experiences that we've seen lately? Well, the first thing we want to do is look at the universe or the environment of interest groups. First thing, an interest group or interest groups are organizations of people who share a common political belief, and they aim to influence policy either through electioneering or through lobbying, which is direct connection and influence over the decision maker. Most of them are going to choose the lobbying method. Lobbying are efforts to influence public policy through contact with public officials on behalf of an interest group. And it can involve as simple as sitting down with a decision maker and explaining your situation. It could involve actually writing a law and bringing it to them. Or a lot of times it involves reminding them that interest groups they have a lot of members and they can garner a lot of money to either support or oppose a candidate. So the goal of an interest group in comparison to that of a political party is to influence policy at the decision-making level rather than just backing up a candidate. Interest groups and political parties share the goal of changing what government does, but they do it in different ways. There are three critical differences between the organizations. First, parties run candidates for office and they coordinate the activities of elected officials. An interest group does not run a candidate. Parties hold legal advantages to get on the ballot because they're recognized by most states. Third, elected partisans have a direct effect on government action, whereas interest groups have at most an indirect influence, meaning that when you're elected as a Democrat, you're a part of a coalition, you're a partisan to the Democratic Party, or when you're elected as a Republican, the same thing. And it's expected you're going to behave in a certain way, which is to follow the party line. There's a formal role for political parties in government, whereas there is no formal role for interest groups. Excuse me. So let's look at Madison. He seems to be the one that had the most to say about interest groups. He said the most common and durable source of factions, which are interest groups, has been the various and unequal distribution of property. Those who hold and those who are without property have ever formed distinct interests in society. So what he's saying is that interest groups are a basic, fundamental, and early established feature of American democracy, even though they're not in the Constitution, just like political parties. Madison, who's the father of the Constitution, said, "The urge to differ is universal." He thought that the only way to get rid of the influence of faction would be to deprive the nation of liberty. So if you can't beat them, join them. So from his perspective, it's better to have an environment with a lot of factions so that they can balance each other out. This is where he came up with the tyranny of the majority and accepting the voice of the minority. Now, there are different kinds of interest groups with different purposes. Economic interest groups are a type of interest group that seek public policy that will provide monetary benefits to their members. And these are the most powerful. There are a variety of economic interest groups out there. Every business type has interest groups that are in their corner influencing policy for them. Now, citizens groups are a type of interest group that seek to change spending, regulations, or government programs concerning policy. They're also known as public interest groups. And a single issue group is a type of interest group that has a very narrowly focused goal, and it seeks to change one single topic, or government program, or a piece of legislation. Mothers Against Drunk Drivers would be a good example. So the next thing we want to do is look at organizational structure. Centralized interest groups have an office in Washington, D.C., usually in an area called K Street, that helps them to stay in touch with members of Congress, bureaucrats, and the president and his staff. They provide a venue for attracting press coverage of the group's concerns. There are two different types of groups, centralized and confederation. Large groups like the AARP, the Association for the Advancement of Retired People, and the NRA, the National Rifle Association, are centralized groups. They have headquarters typically in Washington, D.C. They have members in offices throughout the country. They make lobbying decisions at the larger, more nationalized level. They're very efficient. It's tougher to know what the members on the ground want, though, because usually the members pay their dues and contribute to their PACs, but they leave these guys alone to represent them. Independent and local organizations are often structured as confederations. A good example is the National Auto Dealers Association. These are local groups from across the nation, and they band together to form a larger group. It's easy to read the local members, but it's hard to band together and to move in one direction towards a singular goal. It's easier for a larger centralized organization to move towards a singular goal and try to establish national policy. It's easier for these local national, like the National Automobile Dealers Association, it's easier for a local confederation to work towards localized goals. The Tea Party and its relevant organizations is very hard to categorize. Is it a political party or is it in a series of interest groups? The organizations that make up the movement are very diverse. Some hold meetings or public protests, some endorse candidates, and some are simply a website run by a couple of people who call themselves a part of the Tea Party. So the question is, are they interest groups? Are they political parties? Are they both? These guys, it's very hard to peg them. So now let's look at staff and expertise. Staff are generally, there are two types of staff that make up an interest group. The first is your policy experts, and the second is people who know people, and you need both. The problem that we've been seeing is called a revolving door problem. That's a term that describes the movement of individuals from government positions into jobs with interest groups or lobbying firms and vice versa. Over 40% of the representatives that leave the House or the Senate from 1998 to 2005 became lobbyists when they left, including all of the most influential senators and congressmen. K Street is the shorthand term that refers to the area where most Washington lobbyists have their offices, but it also kind of refers to lobbyists as a group. It derives from the name of the street in Washington, D.C., where they once were concentrated. Of course, now they're all over the country. The membership of an organization can be described by distinguishing between mass associations and peak associations. Mass associations are interest groups that have large numbers of dues-paying individuals as members. A mass association is similar to things like the American Association of Retired People. For $16 in dues, members can get discounts on car rentals, insurance, hotels. They get help doing their taxes. They also have a legislative program that is one of the most powerful lobbies in Washington, but most people and most members don't even realize they're contributing to it. The NRA works almost the same way. A peak association is an interest group whose members are businesses or other organizations rather than individuals. Peak associations, like the Business Industry Political Action Committee, is an association of several hundred businesses and trade organizations that aim to elect pro-business individuals into Congress and support them. Or, if you're anti-business, they will oppose you. An individual cannot directly join a peak organization. Their members are part of they are members of an organization at a less centralized level that's part of this centralized organization. So it's more decentralized in nature. Well, now we'll get back to the collective action problem, public goods, and free riding. But now we're going to talk more about the free riding side. Free riding is the practice of relying on others to contribute to a collective effort, while failing to participate on your own behalf and still benefiting from the group's success. Because government changes to policies affect everybody, when an interest group helps to influence policy, whether or not you're a member of that interest group, you may benefit. Whether you work for the change or not, it's hard to motivate people to work for change when they know they'll benefit from the efforts of a larger group. Example, you show up at a potluck dinner, you don't have any food to bring. What happens if nobody brings the food? What happens if only 2 or 3 people bring the food, but everybody's there to eat it? Everybody's supposed to contribute equally, but does everybody contribute equally? Probably not. Somebody's always that guy that brings like a bottle of soda and then wants to participate in the potluck. What would you think if everybody got whatever the highest grade in your class was? So if one person makes an A, everybody gets an A. Should someone who did nothing or very little get the same grade as the person who legitimately earned everybody the A? That is the collective action problem, and the people that really didn't do much of anything but get the same A, those are the people who are free riders. Now, you've worked in groups, I'm sure, where you've had free rider problems, where it's 1 or 2 people that do all the work, and that's why a lot of people don't like working in groups. They say, hey, let me work by myself. Well, we still want you to work in groups, but you do have the collective action problem, getting people to participate equally without participating equally in the benefits. That's hard. Overcoming collective action problems. First, solitary benefits. That's the satisfaction derived from the experience of working with like-minded people. So that's a solitary benefit. Purpose of benefits is the satisfaction that you derive from the experience of working towards the goal. So solitary benefits are working with like-minded people. Purpose of benefits is you want to make a difference in terms of your policy goal. Coercion is the way you eliminate free riding by potential group members by requiring them to participate. Labor unions, for instance, set up in many states, not in Texas, but in many states, labor shops, so that you have to be a member of the labor organization, because the organization contracts with the employer and gets a benefit package and a pay package for everybody, so everybody participates. If you don't have that, like in Texas, where you can't collectively benefit in that way, you can't have a union shop in Texas. What happens is that you will have some people that get the same benefit package and the same pay package, but did not contribute to the labor union that negotiated the package. And this is a problem. Selective incentives are benefits that are available only to people who participate, like member services offered by an interest group. A good example would be, I'm a member of AARP. I'm also a member of Texas, the Texas Federation of Teachers, and I get benefits by being a member of those organizations because I contribute financially to those organizations. If I don't contribute, I don't get the representation that other members do. Now, an interest group entrepreneur is the leader of an interest group who defines the group mission, its goals, and creates a plan to achieve them. So these are the designated leaders of the group. So look here. Here is somebody from the AAA fixing a lady's tire. Now, in this case, she's going to get a selective incentive, because if you're a member of AAA, they will come out and fix your tire if you have been paying into AAA. But if you don't, they won't come out. So the American Automobile Association is a well-known provider of road services, and to get the road service, you have to be a contributing member to AAA. But few people are aware that they also have lobbies that affect a wide range of policies. And if you are a member of AAA, you're not the only one who benefits from those policy changes. So there are people who benefit, free riders, equally from the work that the AAA does, but they're not going to get the AAA to come out and change their tire. That is a selective benefit. Now, the logic of collective action is that group formation is not automatic. Even when a number of citizens want the same thing from government, their common interests may not lead them to organize. Organizing takes effort, and sometimes, especially for people who don't have as broad a financial incentive, the effort is too much. Some groups remain latent, a term describing a group that is politically like-minded people that is not represented by any interest group. For instance, if you're a college student and you're concerned about tuition, so was every other college student. But if you're not a member of an interest group that is trying to lobby or affect decisions regarding financial aid and tuition increases, then you're a member of a latent group. That's a group that could form if they wanted to, but don't. People rarely participate if they don't see the benefits of participating. Let somebody else do the work. Attracting members is just as important for success as lobbying is, because the more people you have, the more you'll be listened to. Economic groups are easier to form because they have smaller numbers of donors with a lot more money to spend, and the costs of free riding are higher because they can have selective benefits and tell you, look, we are going to work on behalf of the meat packers industry, and if you don't join with us, then we'll make sure that we don't include your group in any laws that we affect. Businesses find it easier to lobby. As they generate their revenue through other means, like the sale of goods and services, they can use that money for lobbying. A contrast is a citizens organization that has to spend time raising money and often can't afford to lobby and makes it very expensive to organize. And some groups have no members at all, or are funded by one wealthy person. Given the advantage of small economic groups, one could expect to see this carried to the extreme. A group with no members, and we do see that. For instance, the Coalition for Luggage Security is basically one person. All right, resources. Here's somebody trying to get mercury out of fish. All right, your resources. People, write, call, email, and social media. Money, contributions, ads, funding day-to-day operations, raising money for expert lobbyists, and expertise. This is political information. It's what you know and who you know. So let's look at some strategies that interest groups use. Inside strategies are tactics that are used by interest groups within Washington, D.C. to achieve their policy goals. So this is your insiders on K Street. Outside strategies are tactics used by interest groups outside of D.C. to achieve their policy goal in a more decentralized way. So let's look at your inside and outside strategies. Inside strategies. Groups lobbying government officials directly in Washington, D.C. But your outside strategies are just as important or more important. This is using public pressure, elections, and the media to influence a policy that you want to see. And you can use both inside and outside strategies. And if you have a large enough member base, like the NRA or the AARP, you see this all the time. Inside strategies would include direct lobbying. That's getting like-minded people to talk to you in Congress to support a bill. Actually making contact with a member of Congress, a bureaucrat, or relevant decision maker. Helping lawmakers enact policies that they prefer. Drafting legislation and regulations. 3/4 of interest groups do this. They draft their own legislation and bring it, and a lot of that becomes the law itself. Interest groups look for members who are sympathetic to their cause and influential in Congress or the bureaucracy, and they basically ask them to sponsor the legislation. Research, becoming an expert in the arena that you are trying to influence policy in. Background studies can help group proposals be more persuasive. Testimony. Testifying in front of congressional committees is incredibly important, and most of the people that testify are lobbyists. Litigation is the use of lawsuits and legal practices. Interest groups sue to claim a certain practice is unconstitutional or contrary to existing statute. They can use their own lawyers, they can hire lawyers, or they can use pro bono legal help, and interest groups often frequently produce amicus curiae, which are called friend of the court briefs. So the Brown case is a very famous case in which the NAACP, an interest group, actually took that case to court. And we see this also in ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union cases, all the time. NAACP and Brown versus Board of Education is your best example. The most famous case ever brought by an interest group. The NAACP challenged the constitutionality of separate but equal laws when it was clear that Southern states would never acquiesce to the demands of non-discrimination. Also, working together. Groups can pool their resources, become coalitions, usually for short-term, focus goals like adjusting the provisions of a bill before Congress and bring more members and more interested parties to the table. Your outside strategies. One is grassroots. That's coming from the bottom up. It relies on the participation by group members such as a protest or letter writing or email or phoning. AstroTurf lobbying, though, is a new term. Any lobbying method initiated by an interest group designed to look like it's spontaneous and individual, but it's actually a group formed from the top. So this is artificial turf, AstroTurf. It's artificial grassroots. Now, mobilization is when you influence public opinion by calling people, emailing them, having conversations, getting into the media, and all of a sudden stirring the pot, so to speak. And then electioneering. This is working for or against a candidate to influence the outcome of an election. And this happens a lot with lobbies. They'll tell you, look, we can either contribute money to your campaign or we can fight your campaign. Interest groups get involved in electioneering by making contributions, by urging others to support the candidate, by endorsing candidates, by funding campaign ads, or by mobilizing support. They can also coerce, which is either to force or threaten, decision makers by threatening to support their opponents in the next election. And so to tell a decision maker, look, I've got $500,000 budgeted towards this policy, and you can be the one that introduces it and backs it, and I'll spend that $500,000, or we will spend that $500,000 to help you. Or you can be against us and we will spend that $500,000 against you. And these days it's in the millions because we're going to get into political action committees, but especially with super PACs, you will see this kind of thing happening all the time. All right, so organizations. This is where we get into our PACs and our super PACs. A 501c3 is a tax-deductible organization. It takes contributions. It cannot engage in political activities or lobbying. It can only do voter education and mobilization. A 527 can spend an unlimited amount on issue advocacy and on voter mobilization, but it cannot contribute to the candidates or coordinate the efforts of a candidate or a political party. A 501c4 can spend unlimited amounts on electioneering. It does not have to disclose where it gets its contributions, but at least half of its activities needs to be non-political. It cannot coordinate events with candidates or parties. A political action committee can contribute directly to a candidate, but it has a strict limitation on the amount of campaign contributions. And now we get to the big daddy of all of them, the super PAC. These guys can spend unlimited amounts on electioneering, supporting, or opposing a candidate. Now, they can't make a direct contribution to the candidate, and they can't coordinate with the efforts of the candidate or the party. However, they can run ads, and they can do things that the candidate can't in amounts of money that the candidate could never spend or collect. So the debate over these super PACs. Traditional PACs are limited to a $5,000 annual limit on an individual contribution, and they're prohibiting from accepting contributions from corporations or labor unions. Super PACs, though, are free from these restrictions. They cannot give directly to the candidate or to the party that supports the candidate, but they can run TV ads, they can electioneer, they can spend money in any way they wish. They cannot coordinate how they spend money directly with the candidate. Their basic limitation, really, in reality, is only the size of the donor's bank account. Now, there is a group of people, two brothers, called the Koch brothers. And the Koch brothers alone are tremendously vital for the conservative Republican Party in their fundraising and in the number of super PACs that they support, and they give millions of dollars. Now, the reason that super PACs exist is because of a decision called Citizens United from the Supreme Court. This really makes it easier for corporations and labor unions to speak through financial spending, because the court said that these organizations had First Amendment rights, and since they didn't literally speak, their right to be recognized as individuals, because they are recognized as individuals. A corporation pays income tax just like you and I. Their right, they have First Amendment rights. All the First Amendment rights are given to the corporations. With very few exceptions, anyone can create a super PAC. The candidate cannot directly have a super PAC, but the rules are so vague that most candidates have found ways around them. To become a super PAC, all you really need to do is send a form letter to the Federal Election Commission notifying them of your intent to become a super PAC. That's it. The question becomes, has the Supreme Court, in the name of the First Amendment, opened the floodgates for uncontrolled campaign spending and electioneering? This is a big debate. Some say, actually, it's benefiting the little guy, and others say, no, it's hurting the little guy. We'll see. Does this give some candidates an unfair advantage, or does it actually equalize the playing field and make it easier for some candidates to get the financial support that they need to fight big pocket candidates? Now, these are your top 20 lobbying spenders, and this is in hundreds of thousands of dollars. Well, actually, no, millions. $885,975,680 from the United States Chamber of Commerce. General Electric, $274 million. The American Medical Association, $274 million. The American Hospital Association, $225 million. The Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, $224 million. The American Association of Retired People, $217 million. National Association of Realtors, $194 million. Blue Cross Blue Shield, $191 million. Northrop Grumman, a defense contractor, $180 million. ExxonMobil, $176 million. Verizon, just Verizon, $176 million. Edison Electric, $165 million. Boeing, $164 million. The Business Roundtable, $162 million. Lockheed Martin, $158 million. AT&T, $145, excuse me. Southern Company, which is Southwestern Bell, $138,680,000. National Cable and Telecommunications Association, $132 million. General Motors, $131 million, and Pfizer, $126 million. And the way this is done, it's looking back at the number of the amount of money they spent from 1998 to 2012. And this is from opensecrets.org, and you can look at that, and it will tell you how much money each of the companies is spending on lobbying. So the tactics. Most groups use more than one major strategy. Decisions about the strategy depend on resources that are available, what approach the group wants to take, and the circumstances. And they'll often use these strategies all at once, too. The Humane Society has a large membership base, but very little presence in Washington, so they're more likely to use a grassroots technique. During the protest of the proposed Stop Online Piracy Act, or SOPA, businesses and organizations with large web presences, like Wikipedia, shut down access to their sites and went black for a day in protest to the proposed bill. This outside technique contrasted sharply with the inside strategies that were used by businesses and industries who were for SOPA, like Disney. All right, so then we get to the theory of bureaucratic capture, which says that regulators become captured or persuaded by or beholden to the industries that they are supposed to regulate. This is a cartoon. Why do we need a crowbar to review regulations? Because each one has a lobbyist wrapped around it. And so that's capture. See how all of the lobbyists have captured each of the pieces of legislation and the legislators. Here are some 4 truths about interest groups. Number 1, they tend to lobby friends more than enemies and undecideds, and they will moderate their demands in the face of any resistance. Number 2, complaints about the power of interest groups often come from the losers of a political conflict. Number 3, many interest groups will claim that they affect policy even if their lobbying had no discernible effect. Number 4, interest groups are almost always active on both sides of a conflict. So if one or more groups are successful, then they are likely one or more unsuccessful groups on the same side. So this is total lobby spending. And as you can see, from 2000 up to about 2010, it went way up. 2011, it started to go down. And here's some stuff about regulation. First, lobbying is heavily regulated. Second, lobbying firms have to file annual reports that identify their clients and specify how much money they were paid by each one. Third, similar interest groups and corporations have to file reports listing staff members who spend more than 20% of their time lobbying Congress and detailing expenditures of lobbying firms. And the other really interesting thing is that people who leave government jobs cannot lobby for 1 year, but after that year, they can certainly lobby. Former elected officials have to wait 2 years after leaving their positions to lobby. There are about 30,000 registered lobbyists and 100,000 plus national and regional interest groups in the United States. So why are there so many lobbyists? The reach of government, and particularly its total annual spending, has increased. And as there's more money to be had, there's going to be more lobbies. Communication advances like email, websites, and cell phones make it easier to lobby. Now, this guy is interesting. This is Jack Abramoff, and he actually affected El Paso very badly. If you Google him up, you will find out that Abramoff was convicted of scamming several Native American tribes, including the Tiguas. He scammed the Tiguas out of $4 million. He told the Tigua tribe that if they would support, that if they would pay him, he would lobby on their behalf to make sure that at the national level, there would be legislation that would support their ability to keep a casino. When he knew that he was lobbying on the other side for people who had a lot of power, who didn't want that casino and actually wanted to fight it. So the bottom line is that he played two sides against the middle, and he stole over $4 million from just the Tiguas alone, and he did it to like 10 other tribes. So are all lobbyists the same? The answer, of course, is no. Lobbyists for General Electric spent over $11 million on lobbying in 2006, but the Sierra Club spent less than $100,000, but it's a grassroots organization. Keep in mind that all of this lobbying is over the $3 trillion budget, and money spent on lobbying is comparatively small in comparison to the amount of money that's up for grabs. Boeing spent money on meetings with members of the Department of Defense, members of Congress and the congressional staff, senior members of the president's staff, and leaders of labor unions who work for Boeing. Now, this brings us to something else that we're going to talk about a little bit later, but it's called the Iron Triangle problem. And the Iron Triangle problem deals with, specifically, with when you have a legislative committee and a bureaucratic department like the Department of Defense and a contractor who all benefit equally because the contractor lobbies and pays money to the legislators. The legislators decide whether or not the Defense Department's going to get their new toy, and the Defense Department needs Boeing to create that new toy, for instance. So what you've created is called an iron triangle. One way to think about interest group lobbying is as an investment. Organized groups can spend a relatively small amount of money up front to collect much more money later, and so they see this as a return on their investment. Though this view may sound very cynical, some would argue that it accurately reflects the way that lobbyists and interest groups themselves perceive the process. Now, this is big spenders on 527. These are big 527 organizations that spent money on the election in 2012. Act Blue supported the Democrats. The College Republican National Committee supported the Republicans. Citizens United supported the Republicans. Emily's List supported the Democrats. Service Employees International Union supported the Democrats. Plumbers and Pipefitters Union supported the Democrats. Gay and Lesbian Victory Fund supported the Democrats. The Go Pack supported the Republicans. The New Conservative Coalition supported the Republicans. And the International Brotherhood of Electric Workers supported the Democrats. And these are all 527s or PACs. So what does contribute to the success of an interest group? One thing is salience. Salience is the general population's level of familiarity and concern over the group's goal. The lower the salience, the better it is for lobbyists. Why? Americans have a lot of things that compete for their time: families, jobs, religious obligations, sports, hobbies. They can't pay as much attention as members of Congress who are full-time can. So in the case of provisions that are highly technical and affected industries may be the only interested party, and they will get their way through money and by lobbying. By contrast, if the entire public is paying attention to an issue, no special interest can dictate its will on that issue. Recall the National Turkey Federation increased the amount of turkey served in school lunches simply because nobody bothered to object, which is why now in most school lunches you either have chicken nuggets every day or turkey everything, and that's because no one cared and they benefited. Conflict. If no other group opposes what your group is trying to do, you're going to win. It's pretty easy for a group to lobby to get what it wants if there's no one who cares. Now, there's two types of interest group conflicts. The first is conflicts between groups. And by the way, if you don't know what the president's doing over there, this is the annual pardoning of the turkey. He does it every Thanksgiving, and actually, it's a stunt that's got started by the turkey industry to sell turkeys. Why aren't there at least two groups contesting every issue? Remember that there are many latent interests. An issue may be unnoticed except by one side or the other. Or the opposition may decide to lobby another issue, or the opposition may be so small there's no fight. Like a small group of Americans who want to abolish public schools. They're organized, but they're never going to get it done. Conflicts between a group and public preferences are another type of conflict. How might groups convince policymakers when their interests run counter to public preference? If the polls are against that group, I don't care how much money the group has, they probably aren't going to win because that's for sure. It's for sure that the official will not be reelected the next year. So, how do groups succeed? First, research and testimony. Second, knowledge and expertise. Third, they seek to achieve small or moderate changes rather than radical ones, especially over salient issues. It depends on what the group is asking for and whether there is significant opposition. If there's a lot of opposition, you're not going to get it through. Fears of large groups dominating the policy-making process to the exclusion of public opinion, according to the authors, seems to be unfounded. What do you think? This is an important question. What do you think? Do you think this is a problem? Or do you think that it gets made into a problem more than it really should be? So let's look at our summary. The number of interest groups in America and the amount of spending has definitely increased in recent years. There have been a larger variety of organizations and lobbying tactics as media and as technology has changed. The biggest challenge is to galvanize members in order to participate in efforts. The larger and more active the group, the more effective it will be. Interest groups are more likely to succeed when they work together as a coalition and they use strategies that inform candidates about the issues. So money doesn't always talk. The authors contend that money isn't everything. You might disagree. Interest groups reflect the conflictual nature of American politics, and they shape policy by keeping it in line with the diverse goals of policymakers and of the public. And that ends our lecture for this chapter. Have a good week.